It's a pleasure to be here today. A real honor to have an old friend of mine, Lonnie Ali, and thank you for agreeing to spend the hour with us. This is our Voices of Parkinson's virtual experience, and this is a series, and we're going to do a 4-week virtual event, and we're going to highlight some of the most important voices in the field that have helped us to shape the future and to really take this journey together. And next week we're going to have another exciting person, Rich Clifford, who was one of the astronauts who was shot into space multiple times with Parkinson's disease, and that'll be a great interview as well. And of course we have the wonderful book that is out, the Ending Parkinson's Disease book, and that is now out and available. It's lost a little bit of oxygen to everything that's going on with the COVID crisis, but we have been hashtagging Parkinson Pact, prevent, advocate, care, and treat, and really want to be sure that we get the word out and we change the trajectory of this disease. So thank you, Lonnie, for joining us today. We're going to have, I promised Lonnie we would do an informal chat today. And she's wearing her baseball cap, and we cleared that before because she knows I'm a huge baseball fan as well. And so this is going to be very informal. We have a chat bar that's open here, so you can ask your questions, and we're happy to answer them as we move along through this chat. And I'm going to just start by reading an excerpt out of the book. This is in chapter 7 on taking care. And just the first section of that talks about, today in many parts of the world, the majority of Parkinson's are never diagnosed. And even among those who are diagnosed, most don't receive appropriate care. There's almost universal underappreciation of the disease. And however, stops at the doors of anyone who lives with or cares for, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, is caring for Parkinson's disease, really recognizes and understands, what the challenges are. So with that, I'd like to introduce my good friend, Lonnie Ali. You went to Vanderbilt University, which is one of my favorite places. I've been lecturing there every year for the last decade plus, and to a lot of the young neurologists who are interested in Parkinson's disease. So I was happy to see that in your biography. She earned her master's of business from UCLA in Los Angeles, and is a Louisville native. And one fact that people may not appreciate is that her mother and Muhammad Ali's mother were friends, and so they were actually best friends. So Marguerite Williams and Odessa Clay, they lived on the same street in Louisville, raised their families together. And of course, Lonnie married Muhammad in 1986, but had known him for a long time before that. And she married him after his diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. And you and I, Lonnie, we met in the year 2000. I don't know if you remember, but we were introduced by my mentor, who's Malin DeLong, who's at Emory University, who is just a wonderful person, the recent recipient of the Lasker Award for his work in Parkinson's and basal ganglia. And I remember every time I saw Muhammad, I would ask him, to do something. And if he didn't want to do it, he would always say, he made up a quip for me. He would always say, "Ain't no joking, Dr. Oken." And he always had such a great sense of humor. And so welcome, Lonnie. And I want to start out with talking about how important it is to have a sense of humor when dealing with this disease.
Good morning, Dr. Oken and everyone. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar on Parkinson's disease and caregivers. We have known each other for a long time, and seems like almost like it was yesterday in a way. Time flies, but living with Muhammad and knowing him for most of my life, I've known him since I was 6 years old. And just a little correction there, my mother and his mother did not raise their families together. Muhammad was already raised. He was 22 when I was 6. So
okay,
I'm a little bit younger than he is. Or that he was, but humor is extremely important. Fortunately, Muhammad had lots of it. Even throughout the illness, he always exhibited humor. And the best thing was just to hear that gut laugh that he would give when he got somebody like you or Dr. DeLong or anybody, where he could pull a joke or a trick on you and show you something that would amaze you and just totally take you off your balance. So humor is important. I know it was for me. It just kept things light. Laughter is important, and Muhammad was very good about that. And I think we all should incorporate that. And whether or not you have PD or not, whatever you're dealing with, humor is important, I think.
In the very first day that I met him, I was sitting on the bed next to him and taking his history as a young physician, and so this was 20 years ago, and and he was falling asleep while I was taking his history. And so or so I thought he was falling asleep, but he was playing a joke on me, and he was falling over into me, like while I was, trying to get it to, dutifully trying to get every detail and make sure I got everything right. And then at some point I, like he knew, like I had reached a level of like, what the heck, the guy's like falling all over me. And then all of a sudden he startled me and opened his eyes really big. And this is one of his things that he would always do. And I almost jumped out the window, like, and
Right.
he was totally awake the whole time, but he had that wonderful sense of humor, about him.
Right, he did. He did that on CBS too. If people have seen that on 60 Minutes, he did it to Ed Bradley when we were in
Yes.
Cuba. That played that whole sleep scenario, almost like narcolepsy, where you just fall asleep and then he wakes up and just really kind of scares everybody.
Yeah, he had a wonderful way about him. Now, let's talk about you a little bit more. So on Twitter, you describe yourself as a wife, a mother, a philanthropist, a baseball fanatic, and a Parkinson advocate. And so of those things, like what's most important to you? Like I know you're passionate for all of them, but where do you throw your chips in terms of like what gives your life the most meaning?
Uh, Interesting. You should ask that. In fact, I don't control my Twitter account. I was having someone do that, but I gave them that text to put in there. But I would say at the moment, probably being a mother and a future grandmother
Uh,
is what really
Congratulations.
excites me. But interestingly enough, before all the COVID happened, I had signed on one of my bucket lists was to follow and the University of Louisville's baseball team around the United States, wherever they were playing, and be there with them. And I got into about 3 or 4 games before all of this happened and wasn't able to continue. But baseball, as you know, Dr. Oken, is one of my loves. My son played. Muhammad and I enjoyed so many games, in travel baseball and baseball in Michigan. Just loved it. Those were the good days, and so I really love that. But PD is one of my passions as well because, you know, Muhammad, ever since we were married, he's had this disease, and so I've sort of grown up with the research and, met so many wonderful people who are involved in the PD community and on the medical and research side, as well as patients and caregivers. Um, so it's one of my passions as well. And as you know, we have the Muhammad Ali Parkinson Center here in Phoenix that does such wonderful work as well.
Yeah, it's an absolutely wonderful, beautiful facility, a center of excellence, and has also been one of the models in the United States for giving outreach,
Right,
outreaching to underserved communities, which I know is something that you've also been passionate about, making sure that people can receive the care that need the care, and tell us a little bit about that, and have your worries been stoked at all by the COVID 19 crisis and all these Parkinson patients who can't get to care, appropriate care?
COVID presents many challenges, and caregiving presents its own set of challenges, even on a good day. So with you overlap COVID on top of that, and it just makes it even more difficult. Thank goodness we have telemed now, where you can, connect with a physician or a medical professional via Zoom or FaceTime. It's funny because before all this happened, I figured out with Muhammad, because Dr. DeLong was in Atlanta, we're here in Phoenix, that we started FaceTiming, and it was sort of like the prevent of telemed, so I could turn the phone on and show Muhammad, or the iPad, show him, whatever was going on with Muhammad, or have Muhammad talk to him or whatever. And it was really great. So I think with the advancement of telemed, I think it's probably made things a little bit easier that way, as far as, getting, connecting with your physician, your Parkinson's specialist. But the outreach is important, extremely important for Parkinson patients. Some people, I was just surprised to learn how many people are isolated that don't have access to good health care, period, but especially to professionals who are Parkinson specialists. As you know, you're in Central Florida, and I think before you went there, it was vacant. I don't think there was anyone. I know in Louisville, Kentucky, you would think they would have many Parkinson professionals. They don't. When when we purchased a house there, it was after we moved here. We had a second home there, and it was interesting to find that there was maybe one or two Parkinson specialists there. One of them left, so it was left with one. I don't know how many are there now, but there were just large pockets throughout the United States where there were no physicians at all, and people would have to drive 3 or 4 hours to get there. So the outreach to the community is extremely important. Out here, it's important because I know how difficult it is, well, not just here, anywhere, to get a Parkinson patient into a clinic. I mean, the planning, the maneuvering, the physical toll it takes on you just to move them around, especially if you're the caregiver, it's very difficult. And here we have, of course, the Native Americans who are on reservations who don't come in for treatment. So it's important that we outreach to them here. And Muhammad and I were also concerned about people who were in shelters. There's a lot of people in shelters that are afflicted with different illnesses, PD being one of them. So it was important for us to do outreach to them as well. And in outlying communities, like I said, where there aren't Parkinson physicians. So community outreach has been one of our main focal points at the Muhammad Ali Parkinson Center, to make sure those people are reached and their needs are met.
Yeah, which is, so important, and people forget about, the numbers are actually staggering, and it's now the most rapidly rising disease and number of cases of any neurological disease, and it's going to overtake our healthcare system if we don't get our acts together and start to do something about it. And so I think that I know that the efforts that you all have been involved with in getting out to the communities are the grassroots types of things we talk about. We need to agitate more. We need to be more charismatic. We need to get out there and make sure people know what the needs are of the people that are living with the disease, not just, talking about the cures and all of the different treatments that can come along.
And I think, Doctor, what I was really, really happy to see in your book was the discussion of, how some people may even become afflicted with PD, and you talked about the environmental factors, which we certainly believe is what contributed to Muhammad's development of PD, the toxins in the environment. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons why we're seeing so many more cases, or it's becoming more frequent, that you run into people that have PD. Whereas before, when I remember when I was younger, I didn't know anybody with PD or anybody had been diagnosed. And I think Muhammad may have been the first person that I knew that had it. So, and of course, maybe it's like, sometimes when you get a red car of a certain model, all of a sudden you see so many others just like it. But I really believe that we have seen a uptick in the number of cases of PD being diagnosed and treated as time goes on.
Absolutely. So we're getting a slew of questions coming in here, Lonnie. So we have a question from Mark Mason, who asks, for patients and caregivers at various points in the journey, what is your best advice for living life to its fullest, particularly in this uncertain time? Your best advice for caregivers and patients at various points in the journey.
You have to get up every day with gratitude, and you have to live every day to its fullest. And that means taking advantage of whatever opportunities that present itself. Especially now, I wouldn't, you do have to be organized, and, you do have a schedule with Parkinson patients with regards to meds and all of that, but just seize the day. We're sort of restricted in our movements at the moment, and I know this presents many challenges for so many. Just trying to navigate and trying to keep spirits lifted. You know, the weather is warmer. Get outside as much as you can. And even with me, I get cabin fever very easily, but just trying to stay within the guidelines. Nothing prevents you from getting in your car and taking a ride. Go through different neighborhoods or just go out and see what's going on. And that was important for Muhammad, especially just to keep his mood lifted. And there was no COVID, but just to get him out there and to keep him moving and to keep him connected, is put him in the car, drive him around, let him see things, and you've got to find things interesting to do. You can't really socialize. So, whether it's planning your own backyard barbecue for just you and whoever you're, sheltering in place with. And I know some people aren't now, but I would still suggest, given the complexities and the fragileness of a Parkinson patient, that you do not take them out into public and mingle into public spaces or anybody who comes near them. So you sort of just have to invent things on your own. And, backyard barbecues, playing music, playing board games, watching games on television. There's so many things, reading to each other, depending on the level of advancement of the Parkinson disease in the patient. You really have to keep them motivated and keep them, their spirits uplifted as well as yours. Check in with your doctors, do Zoom or FaceTime with your family and friends, with your physicians, of course. Don't forget that, even though this is going on, stay connected. So important. We are human beings and we have to stay connected. So whichever way you can do that, especially with, technology as it is today, it makes it a whole lot easier. Do that. Zoom calls are great. Muhammad used to love FaceTiming with his kids because none of them lived here in Arizona. So and that was always, so he always found that interesting. And so many of the kids were so good. Rashida was the best at, one of his twins, at just entertaining her dad for an hour on FaceTime. It was just so great. I mean, she'd just do any and everything. You just have to be creative, but, take advantage of every opportunity you have. Don't try to choreograph or script the day, because that can get to be boring, but you can think of other things to do. Even if you can drive through a botanical garden, or, if the zoos are open, to be able to drive around, through those, or something of that nature. Watching Netflix, but, Netflix is, you can become a couch potato watching Netflix. I'm one of them. If you have an exercise bike, get on that. Muhammad used to get on an exercise bike, but just try to keep life light and keep yourself inspired, but always try to stay healthy and your mood uplifted, because it's important. I noticed with Muhammad, the hardest thing with Parkinson's for me was depression. And that's the last thing you want in a Parkinson patient, is for them to slip into depression. And given what is going on today with COVID, that would be so easy because they're so confined. So just try to keep things light.
Yeah, and I think that's really great advice. Light, there's still fun to be had, even if you can't do some of the things that you did before. And a lot of people don't talk about, if you can safely get into a car and drive and take a ride, that, that's a pretty good way to get out and see what's going on and
Right.
shake off some of the cabin fever. Even good for those of us that have kids that are stuck at home, to put them in the car and shake off a little bit of cabin fever. My favorite Muhammad driving story was, I don't know if I ever told you the story, but we were going up Clifton Road between two hospitals, and I was assigned to take him from one hospital to another. And we stopped at the first, and first he said, put on some music. And so he looked through all of my CDs and he pulled out Lenny Kravitz. So he wanted Lenny Kravitz, and then he wanted the windows down. And then when we got to the first light on Clifton Road, he said, "Everybody knows me." We started to get into this argument about everybody knows me. Do you know the story? So he said, "Everybody knows
No,
me."
but it's so typical.
Yeah. So he says, "Everybody knows me" on the car ride. And I said, "Muhammad, not everybody knows you. You know, a lot of people know you, but not everybody." So we get into this argument that's going on and on. We stop at the light and he says, "Everybody knows me." And he says, "Watch." And he, it's my old Honda Accord, and he rolls down the window, with the old fashioned window. And he goes, "Watch." And he does his little thing with his lips, and, makes this clucking sound. And he sort of makes a sound, catches the attention and of all the people standing at the bus stop. And and one woman looks and goes, "Oh my God." And then all these people rushed the car. And I was looking at the light going, "Oh, I hope this light changes really fast because my car is surrounded by all these people." And we drove and he said, "Everybody knows me," like that. And I said, "No, not everybody knows you." So then we get to like another light. There's nobody there. Maybe we get to the third light. There's one one Emory student, a young woman sitting on a bench, like working. And he goes, "Watch." He rolls down the window because I said, "Roll up the windows. We're going to get attacked on the car." She rolls down the window again, and he does his little thing and he says, "Watch." And he gets her attention, and she's looking at him like, "What is this weird guy want?" And he keeps trying to get the attention. And I'm just staying there to like watch it play out. He did everything he could until finally she was like, "Quit looking at me, get away." And then we drove off and he said, "Okay, you're right. Not everybody knows. Not everybody knows." But I think your wisdom of just talking about this idea of how do you break up the cabin fever is really important. Now we do have a question here from Susan Richards. We've got a number of questions coming in, and Susan asks you, "I'd like to know more about your experience with advocating. What's important? The medications and the management of the medications, or the diet and the management of diet, the different stages, how care partnering changes, how to look at yourself as a care partner? I find it hard. How do you do it? How do you prioritize? How do you know what's important?"
Actually, Anna, all of that is important. Everything you mentioned is important. First, you need to take a deep breath because it can become overwhelming. I mean, because this is something you do 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I don't care if you work outside the home or you get outside of the home, you always carry the burden of caregiving with you. It never leaves. So, but I would say to prioritize, I would say that organizing the medication and the nutrition is the most important thing for the patient. Because medications change. You need to know when they start, why they were given. You need to really make a chart of this every day, of giving the meds, when you give them, make sure you've given them correctly. If you notice any side effects, any changes in the behavior, to note that, because when you go to a doctor's office, excuse the phone, I'm sorry, you will forget half of what you've observed in maybe the last 30 or 60 days, depending how frequently you take your loved one in. But I would say managing the medications is extremely important, and noticing any side effects or behavioral changes. Nutrition is extremely important, because we noticed with Muhammad, as time went on, his appetite changed, which meant that he wasn't getting all the nutrients that he really should have been getting. He didn't eat as much. He had trouble swallowing, which can happen with some Parkinson patients, not with all. So we had to supplement his diet with, a nutritional supplement of some sort, Boost or one of those. But those two things are extremely important. As far as the caregiver is concerned, your nutrition and your mental and physical health is extremely important, because if you go down, that patient will go down. So you have got to take care of yourself. And I always thought that I was doing a stellar job of doing that, because, I had this checklist that I did this, I did that. I got my annual exam, I exercised today, I did this. But in the end, I realized I did not take as good a care of myself as I should have been. And, it took me 2 or 3 years really till recently to sort of right myself, because there were things that I ignored that I just pushed through and did because I didn't have time to really take the time out to address it. At least I felt that way. And, and things pop up. Life happens. I mean, sometimes you might need surgery or something. Then you wonder, can I put it off? Because how long is it going to take for me to recover from something like that? And who's going to take care of, my husband or my wife or my sister, my brother, whoever that person may be? And those are things you have to plan for, give a lot of thought to, and how you're going to manage. It's almost like, you always talk about being a mother is difficult. You have to manage all these positions that you never get paid for. Well, being a caregiver is about 10 times that, because you do have to manage a lot of different things, a lot of different areas. And you're not just managing your life, you're managing the life of someone else. And it makes it even more complicated. But, you just have to approach everything with a positive attitude. Everything has a solution. And you have to look at it that way. You just got to find it. It takes a lot of time. And I feel for people who work, who have to continue to work, and people who don't have help. I was fortunate to have help, because it is, it can wear on you. Absolutely. Caregiving is no easy job. And I don't care how much money, if you were paid, it's still not easy. It doesn't make it any less easier to take care of another individual and give them the kind of care that they need, especially with someone with Parkinson's or some neurological illness.
Do you think we undervalue the caregivers in our society? Do you think we?
Oh gosh, yes. Caregivers should be celebrated every day, because the burden they take off of the healthcare system is immense. Like I said, there's no pay for being a caregiver to someone you love. You do it out of love for the person. But, there's also no, what if you have to stop working? What care is being given for you financially or whatever to allow you to do that? And even if you are working, to bring in someone that you trust, that your loved one trusts, because that's important. You have to make sure those personalities click. It's hard. Just the search to find somebody's difficult. And then they're not cheap. It's not cheap. When you see how much you pay an hour for a caregiver to come into your home, just think how much you're worth, and people aren't trained as caregivers. It's not something, I didn't go to Vanderbilt or to UCLA to become a caregiver. It's a role you inherit, that you take on responsibility for because you love the person who's been afflicted. But when you bring in someone, what I have found, even from a professional service, many of them have no idea how to take care of a person with Parkinson's disease. They have no idea. And as you know, with anyone, there's nuances depending on the persons, there's nuances to each case. So you almost have to train them yourself how to take care of the person, which is something we had to do. And and that takes a lot of energy as well, a lot of energy.
So one of the questions coming in from overseas is from Natalie Muschamp, and Natalie asks, do you feel that you lost a sense of your identity when you became a carer, of your own identity?
No, I'm not saying some people don't. I went through a caregiving class and I was surprised. Muhammad and I were just very positive people anyway. We're just, we always see the glass half full or 3/4 full, but I didn't, because I think I may have prepared for this early on. My father had polio. So I was always doing things, and I was the oldest girl. So I was always doing things, waiting on him. So it was sort of part of my personality to be a caregiver, In fact, maybe too much so as a mother, being a caregiver, I'm one of these helicopter moms. But no, I don't feel like I lost who I was. I sort of became Muhammad's voice in many respects. And Dr. Oken, you know that as well. So it's not like I didn't have a platform or I couldn't be who I was, because I am, and because of who I am, I think helped him to continue to be Muhammad and to be able to live comfortably knowing things were taken care of. So I didn't. I could very easily see where someone could get lost in this and lose their identity, become consumed by the role of being a caregiver. Absolutely. And I know you wonder, what should I do? But you have to figure out, it's a difficult choice of navigating that fine line of taking care of your loved one and still taking care of you, and keeping your identity of who you are and pursuing your life. I have a friend who recently actually lost her husband to COVID, who had Parkinson's disease, and he had Parkinson's disease, and she was able to get wonderful caregivers in to take care of him. And she herself was a neurologist, a retired neurologist. And she would go on these, she always allotted herself time to go explore and to do something to live her life. So she'd go on these fantastic trips, you know, wherever, and it may be a week or 2 weeks. She'd always be able to stay in touch with her husband. He wasn't to the point where he couldn't communicate and that kind of thing. But she would reward herself every so often with something great. And maybe that's one of the things you could do, but you have to continue to pursue your interest. You might have to modify how you pursue them, but I would encourage you to always try to live your life as well. You can't give up your life, as you know, to become a caregiver. When I say give it up, just totally ignore what you were doing and not find some kind of satisfaction and fulfillment and purpose in your life. Because if you, like I said, that's part of your emotional and physical health, spiritual health, and you need to make sure that that's intact. Because like I said earlier, if you go down, that patient will go down. And when you come in happy and infused with positive attitude and spirit, that person picks up on that. So that makes them happy too, really. So you know, it's difficult, but you've got to find a way to find yourself, continue to be yourself throughout this journey.
And the studies have shown, and we've studied it, others have, Parkinson Foundation, multiple foundations, and all of the collective evidence tells us that the majority of caregivers for Parkinson, no matter what scale you use, whatever validated scale you use for caregiver strain, the majority of them have caregiver strain, and just about every caregiver along the journey is going to have strain at some point. It would be rare not to have any. I don't know that I've ever seen it in taking care of thousands of patients with Parkinson disease. And you're quoted in a number of places in the literature and online. If people read about you, you had a nice interview in 2014 with AARP. And you talked a lot about, and you've been a big advocate for caring for yourself, you know, and how important it is for you to be intact, for you to be able to help to be the caregiver that you can be. And I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, because I think what you've said is perhaps you've been the most powerful voice on this aspect. And a lot of caregivers don't speak up for themselves about what you need to do to make sure you have to take care of yourself in order for this relationship to work.
Without a doubt, Parkinson's affects everything, every family member, especially anybody that's within the home. And taking care of yourself becomes a challenge. But I remember early on, Muhammad had wonderful, wonderful doctors. And I remember early on, Dr. DeLong asking me in every visit how I was doing. And I found it odd. I thought, why is he asking about how I'm doing? You know, this is about Muhammad. But it was because he knew that caregivers don't take care of themselves. And Dr. Lieberman, Abe Lieberman, who is also retired now, who's here in Phoenix, a fantastic doctor, used to tell me that caregivers, he would see people come into his office, and all of a sudden the person would be brought in and the caregiver wouldn't be with them, whether it was the wife usually or the husband. And he'd ask what happened, and they died because they neglected themselves. And the toll of taking care of someone, you know, has immense impact on the person, emotionally, physically, whatever. And he said, most caregivers usually die before the person they're taking care of. And he would always tell me that. And he'd ask how I was doing. So it became clear to me very early on that I needed not to be cavalier about this, to really give some thought into what I was doing and taking care of myself. So I always went, you know, I was fortunate. Now, like I said, not everybody can do this. I was fortunate. I had my sister here. I had my nephew here, and I also had an ability to hire outside help to help them help me. So I always exercised, Pilates, weightlifting, with a gym trainer. I had my hair done, I had my nails done. You know, I'd go out and have dinner with a friend or something. That was important. Of course, I always went and did all my annual stuff, but I didn't follow up on a lot of other things with medical that I probably should have. I mean, I had my annual physical, you know, all the stuff women do, the mammograms and all that stuff. I did all that, but there were other things I should have been looking at. And I probably didn't look at my life in total, because it's not like I was just a caregiver. And this is true of most people. I was handling a lot of other things. You know, I had responsibilities with the kids. I had responsibilities with the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville, which was being built and had just opened, and, you know, things were going on there, fundraising, all that stuff. I was involved with Parkinson's here in the Muhammad Ali Parkinson Center here. So I had other duties and things, but to me, it was an interest that gave me purpose and passion. It gave me a reason to get up beside Muhammad, who I love dearly, you know, and it was just important for me to stay connected and bring, like I said, that positive spirit back to him. And it's not always easy. It's very challenging, but, you know, you do have to take care of yourself, and not just physically, mentally, spiritually. You know, you have to take care of yourself, whether you meditate, you pray, whatever you do, you just have to take care of yourself. And you really have to stop and think about, and not, like I said, in a cavalier fashion, what are your needs? What do you need? What are your immediate needs? Do you need somebody to come in and support you, to give you time to go out and do something? Do you need some quiet time? You know, do you need to, you know, some people really like going to church every week. You know, do you have time to do that? You know, can somebody come over so that you could at least get an hour or two away to go do your daily, you know, your weekly worship, because it's important. Meditate, you know, exercise, whatever it is, you have to list those needs and try to address them, you know, in a very organized and realistic way that will work for you and for the person you're trying to take care of. And, you know, you have to realize you can't do everything. You're not super people, superhumans. You know, I used to think that I could handle it all. Well, you can't, because, you know, if a tree bends too far, it will break, and you will too. So you have to be realistic, you know, and not feel guilty about the time you're not spending with a person, because you really do have to spend some time with you and
Oh,
for
it's
you.
just fantastic advice. The questions are pouring in. We have one from Poland, and Anna Pluta wants to know about, there's a kind of apathy that she has seen and lack of motivation. And
Yeah.
as her, in her work as president of her regional Parkinson community group in Poland, she tries to convince her group not to give up on ideas or activities, and to keep moving and improving quality of life. And she wants to know what tips do you have to deal with the apathy?
Is she speaking of apathy in caregivers or apathy in patients?
I get the sense that she's speaking of apathy in the patients within her
Yeah.
group. Yes.
That was brought to my attention early on with Muhammad, you know, because Muhammad, you know, most Parkinson patients, sometimes they don't know they have Parkinson's. They go in, they think they have depression and find out they have Parkinson's. Well, with Muhammad, he never really experienced depression, I don't think, until his mother passed. And the day after she was buried, it was like night and day. You could see it. And that's when you could start to see some of the apathy come through too. But thank God, like I said, Muhammad was a positive person. Thank God for me. that he would not, because Muhammad used to be, Dr. Muhammad was a man of the world. He'd go here, go there. He loved to be out in the public, meeting people, and, going to this city today and that city tomorrow. I mean, that's just who he was. And it got to a point where he didn't initiate those activities. I mean, even just to be out in the community. So I had to do it. I had to say, Muhammad, do you want to go such and such and do such and such? And thank God he always did, until it got to a point where he wasn't really physically able. But he always wanted to do that. He always wanted to get out and be among people, even if it wasn't for a short period of time. And like I said, I had the great fortune of having my sister here. So when we moved to Phoenix, and it's one of the reasons why we moved here, was so that from southwestern Michigan, so that he would have 365 days of the year to do something, where the weather was good and he could get out. So here he would go to sporting events, he'd go to concerts, he even went to rodeos and bull riding, all kind of stuff like that. So it was initiating things. If we were here in the house, initiating board games, bingo. We played Monopoly a lot because Muhammad liked to be the banker and he cheated. He always ended up
Big
with
surprise,
more money.
huh?
Yeah, it was so funny. But he liked bingo, and it also helped with the dexterity, keeping the dexterity going. Reading to him. You just, you have to find out, and if you know the person, you sort of know what they like, whether it's a new menu, new foods, whatever it is. You have to create that excitement in their life, keep them interested. And you have to bring forth the suggestions and get them to participate. And fortunately, I think Dr. DeLong is the one who alerted me to that when I told him, sometimes, any child that would walk up to Muhammad, he would smile. Well, he stopped doing that for a while, and he didn't find joy. I didn't think he was finding joy in it, but it was really the Parkinson's, with the masked face and things. But he said, continue to do it because, that's what he enjoys. Take him out, keep him active. You initiate the activities and just get him to go along, because the more he's out, the better off he will be. And it's true. They too have to keep socializing. You will find as well that a lot of times people with Parkinson's disease, as with any illness, once people know about it, somehow their friends drop off. When I say drop off, they don't drop off into your house. They drop off the list, where they don't stay in touch. They don't come over. It's important that you keep them connected with their friends. And a lot of it's because your friends don't know how to react. They don't know what to do when they're in the presence of the person. How do they interact with them? But you have to tell them, just interact the way you used to. However, just, come over and see them or whatever. Muhammad never had that issue because people always called and checked on him, but I know that happens. So keeping them connected to their lives as well before they were diagnosed with PD is important. But you're going to have to initiate activity, because apathy goes hand in hand with PD.
It's great advice. And Susan Richards DeWitt writes in, and actually several people have written in asking about exercise, and they'd like to know both what exercise did Muhammad do, because he had Parkinson for over 30 years. What kind of exercise did he do, and what kind of exercise did you do?
Well, Muhammad, interestingly enough, he was a boxer. And we have found out that boxing, is really good for Parkinson patients. So in Michigan, we had a gym that was a boxing, it was built out like a boxing gym. And I had exercise equipment around the edges, of the gym, the perimeter of the gym, inside. And we had this big boxing ring, and we had everything Muhammad would have had in a boxing gym. And he would get in there mainly when he had visitors who wanted to pay attention that he could show off for, and continue to do his workouts, like he did as a boxer. And it was amazing. I remember one time our general physician came over, and he was watching Muhammad in the ring, and Muhammad was doing Muhammad used to skip backwards in the ring. And he looked at him, and he looked at me and he said, Muhammad shouldn't be able to do that. And I said, why not? He said, because he has Parkinson's disease. I said, really? But Muhammad could do it. And he got joy out of it, even hitting the heavy bag. So he did that for a while till he couldn't. And then we decided that it would probably be best if he was in physical therapy. And we wanted him, at first we thought, oh, it might be better if he was isolated, so people aren't gawking. So we would put him in a room with a physical therapist, and they'd be working with him. But then we found out, no, Muhammad didn't like that. Muhammad wanted to be out in the general public so that he could engage and he could challenge. So if he was on a bike, he would get on the bike and he would pedal, and whoever was next to him became his opponent because he was going to pedal faster than whatever they were doing. Now there were limitations, of course. He couldn't get on a treadmill and some things like elliptical, nothing like that. But there were things that he could do that, oh, I am so sorry. I thought I turned this off. But things that he could do, oh, I am sorry. Things he could do depending on where he was in the progression of PD that we engaged in. But we took him out to physical therapy 3 times a week. We had the ride here. This was here in Arizona. He enjoyed the ride. He got there, he was among people. There were people in there being worked on as well, so he got to engage that way. And it kept him active. And fortunately, the physical therapist we have here in Phoenix, who continues to be mine, he was very adept at doing things that he knew Muhammad would like. I mean, like kicking balls, being on a bike, things that would keep his movement going. So those were the exercises that he did. And we know, doctor, as you know, with PD patients, exercise is important. It may slow the progression of the illness. So find some kind of exercise to do. When early on, he used to walk a lot, but still, you need to find some kind of exercise. With me, I am not disciplined. So I have to go to classes. And that's what I did. I'd go to Pilates for the stretching. I have a gym coach who, trains me in weights. Unfortunately, I don't have anybody who trains me in cardio. So I'm negligent on that one, but it's important. I mean, for women, especially with bone density, the weight bearing exercises are the best. The Pilates is stretching, which is really good, and building up core muscles, which is good. When you have to move people around, you got to stay strong and keep your core strong. So it's going to help you too. So whatever you like to do, and even if it's dance or whatever, and even if you can't get out, they have lots of videos now that you can bring up on YouTube or do online where you have a coach. But the most important thing is to move, just move.
That's awesome. Great advice. And a whole bunch of people wanted to know about exercise. And apologize to everybody. We won't get to everyone's questions, but I do want to hit a couple more. There's a comment followed by a question from Laura Crawford. First, who talks about watching Muhammad on the black and white TV when she was growing up and singing with her father about the butterfly, and then fighting Parkinson alongside with him. And then she goes on to ask, what are the tips? You talked about nutrition being important, and I know in one of the layovers I had in Phoenix, you were actually traveling, but I spent 4 or 5 hours at your house, and your sister cooked us a Louisville style, dinner, and it was awesome. And she said, "You want to know what keeps Muhammad going? He loves this food." Tell us about nutrition. What tips did you learn, over all those years about nutrition and what helped him, in his Parkinson? A lot of questions on nutrition today.
Well, the grateful thing that I had is Muhammad had a great appetite until he didn't. So, Muhammad grew up, in the South. So anything, and his mother cooked. So anything that was prepared at home, like Southern cooking, he would eat, and of course you have to balance out, the carbs and the proteins, and you have to be careful with the proteins as to when you give the meds and all that stuff. You have to coordinate all of that. But I think a good, healthy, balanced diet with fruits and vegetables and protein are important, where you're getting those essential building blocks of nutrition. Fruit, Muhammad loved fruit pops. They didn't have the high sugar load that most popsicles have. So I get him fruit pops, which he loved because we found out he had an allergy to milk. And he just didn't do well with the alternatives like the almond ice cream or the rice ice cream or anything. But he loved the fruit sorbets and things like that. So we substituted with that. But we tried to cook the foods that we knew he liked. He always had a penchant for whether it was chicken and rice with vegetables. And Muhammad, being an athlete, was always a healthy eater anyway. So it wasn't that difficult. But I remember having him tested and getting, finding out what nutrients he may have been missing so that I could, sort of supplement those. Uh, but I think to make sure that a person gets balanced meals 3 times a day, they have healthy snacks, that they have the availability of food when they want it. Muhammad used to love to cruise by the freezer and open it up to see what he could get out of there on his own. Um, and it's important that they have food that they want to eat. Otherwise, they're not going to eat it. And then as you progress in the illness, you've got to sort of adapt the food to what they can eat and still maintain that nutrition. I'd work closely with my physician with that, and if necessary, bring in a nutritionist. Fortunately for me, Dr. DeLong at Emory, they had nutritionists specifically for Parkinson patients, so that was a big help. But it's still basically the building blocks of making sure they get the right amount of vegetables, protein, and carbs. To keep them healthy, and
Yeah.
the amounts, and if you have to puree it up into a soup, I found soups were a really good way, although you have sometimes with people with swallowing issues, that's not so good, but if you make a thick soup, it's really good. Muhammad really enjoyed that. Milkshakes were good. He really enjoyed that, but we couldn't use milk. We had to use something like an oat milk or something, but you just have to find ways to do it, but you can do it. And you might have to put in some supplements as well, but I'd always check with a physician before I did that. I was educated well. I really love natural medicine. And I remember Dr. DeLong telling me, Lonnie, you have got to be careful with supplements because sometimes they will negate or accelerate the effectiveness of the medication Muhammad may be on, or counteract it. So you really need to be careful what you use. So I would always run that by him, whatever supplement that I was giving Muhammad or whatever. But it's just important to coordinate that with your physician, a nutritionist, and good old common sense, make sure they're eating just like you would feed anybody, a good diet. That's what they need.
So I'm hearing be creative, think about what fits for the individual and be creative. Don't try to think out of the box.
No. I mean, you might add some new dishes with different spices, but people have their own palate and their own preferences when it comes to taste and food, and just try to stay in that and make it as interesting as possible, but still try to make it nutritious.
Yeah, that's great. A question from Amber. Amber wants to know about, for some caregivers, there's shame and there's shyness and sensitivity to actually asking for help. And for some of the people that are on now and are going to watch this recording, can you speak to them, like to people that feel like almost ashamed of maybe some of the behaviors they see in their spouse or their loved one or their care partner, and they feel ashamed and they don't want to speak up? Can you speak to them a bit?
I can imagine just how challenging that would be. First of all, never be ashamed. For one, you are one of those frontline workers that they talk about today. You are to be celebrated and appreciated, and everything you do should be, appreciated. And there's no reason for you to feel ashamed of anything at all, unless you're neglecting yourself or the patient. But illnesses, whether it's PD or any illness, presents its own set of circumstances and nuances. You cannot control what the person did. As Dr. Oken knows, Muhammad used to cut out pictures out of, don't let him see a magazine, because he would take a pair of scissors, and it was actually a side effect of one of the medications, Comtan. I remember so well. It caused punding, which is very interesting. And punding is a non-productive, repetitive behavior that Parkinson patients exhibit when they've been on a medication for a certain amount of time, or maybe too much. And that's what he was doing. He cut out pictures all the time. Well, in some places, people would have thought that was interesting. I mean, embarrassing, but Dr. DeLong found it quite interesting because he said Muhammad cut the line so straight.
Yeah.
But whatever. But still, it was good for his dexterity and too. So you got to look at the positive in it. But there are behaviors. I mean, sometimes incontinence happen, but you just have to work with it, and don't expect people to understand, everyone to understand what you're going through or what your loved one is going through, because they haven't been there. They don't deal with it. They don't know, and that's just you just have to dismiss that. And I don't even know if it's worth your energy to try to explain it to them, because it's really not worth it. Until they go through it, they're never going to understand it. You just have to deal with the issue at hand, but never be ashamed of the person. I mean, because Parkinson patients have trouble eating, they're going to have, food on the front of them, or, they may have incontinence, or they may exhibit these strange behaviors. That's going to happen. You just take care of it. We had these wonderful people who made bibs for Muhammad, the Fussmans, Jim and Esther Fuss in Wisconsin. And these bibs look like a piece of clothing, like the front of a shirt, or they made one for Muhammad that looked like the front of a tuxedo, so that he would have it on, but it wasn't an embarrassing thing. But then he had the ones here and they just slipped around your neck, that were terry cloth or whatever, that were easily washable. But you just do that, and if you need an extra shirt or whatever, we wouldn't put that on him in public if he was going out somewhere, but we'd have something that we could stick in, whether it was a white towel or a colored towel or something, napkin to put in front of him, because they're going to have problems eating. But that's just the way it is, or you may have to feed them, but that's okay. Do it. You can't be ashamed of an illness and the situations and the nuances it presents. Because for one, it's not you. You're trying to adapt to the situation to make it work. And the person can't help it either. It's just the way it is. No more than a person in a wheelchair can't walk. If they can't walk, they can't walk. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It is what it is. It's life.
Yes.
And like I said, life presents itself in many ways. And people need to see that, really. They need to understand. That's why Michael J. Fox would go on interviews and not take his medication on purpose, because then people really got to see what PD was about. Because if he took his meds and he was calm, they would think, oh, that's not so bad. What's so big about Parkinson's disease? But once they saw him off meds, then they saw what was so big about Parkinson's disease, and people need to know about that. And I would offer that we, as a race of people today, the human race, need to develop a little bit more empathy and understanding for people who are not like us. And we have a large majority of people who are not like us. Actually, no one is like you. So, we live with it. But don't, for God's sake, do not be ashamed, because the shame is not on you. The shame is really on the person who may look at you funny or stare at you or whatever. And, don't worry about it.
So this has been just a wonderful hour, and I love your quote and advice here to the last question. You were quoted about telling us why you think you're on the Parkinson journey, and you said, "We are on this journey for a reason. I know that, whether it was to bring attention to this illness or whether it was to save his mortal soul." But thank you for being on the journey. Thank you for being on the journey with us today for the hour. We hope to have you back at some point, and we're just so grateful for your time, and we want to thank the Voices of Parkinson's virtual experience. We'll have more talks coming, and the Parkinson's Foundation for helping to co-sponsor the event. And just thank you for
thank you, Doctor,
to us.
And thank you to the audience out there who is watching and listening and offered questions, whether I got to your question or not. But just know that you are very special people who should be celebrated, as I said. And not everybody can do what you're doing. So just be kind to yourself. You're doing a good job, and I'm sure whoever you're taking care of really appreciates the care and concern that you're showing and giving.
Thank you. And on
Thank
that,
you.
we will end, and thank you for spending the hour, and we'll turn it back over to Abigail, and thank you. Remember, Rich Clifford will be our next voice in Parkinson disease. If you want to hear about being shot into space with Parkinson, that should be fun. And please check the website for all the cool things that are going on, and join the Parkinson Pact to prevent, advocate, care, and treat. We need to be charismatic. We need to, really shake things up and be aggressive, and get the word out. Thank you, Lonnie Ali.
Thank you.